Not at all. No, no, sir, not at all. So, well, Jackie, what do you think?
All right, I think we can probably roll with it. We've got some folks still joining us. Thank you all for being here. I'll let you go ahead and get started, Thaddeus.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jackie. And to all of you out there who are joining us, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy day to join us for today's fourth quarterly business forum with the Jacksonville Women's Business Center. It's my pleasure to work alongside Jackie Peralta now and bringing you this webinar. And on behalf of our district director, Malcolm Richards, and our deputy district director, Jonelle Hine, again, thank you all for joining us. Today, we've got an information-packed webinar scheduled. We have Marshall Reddy from Fran-Net, Florida. He's going to talk to you about franchising and the options available to you. You know, you can either start a business, you can purchase an existing business, or you can start a franchise. And he's going to run you through the wickets of that. And we have the pleasure of introducing you to Mr. Steve Garrison, he is an actual franchisee himself. He's with Action Coach, and he's going to talk to you for a few minutes about his journey. And that will be followed up by Mr. Craig Linsky, our wonderful SCORE mentor counselor, and he's going to talk to you about the financial statement. So that being said, the SBA's main purpose and mission in life is to help small businesses start, grow, expand, and recover after disaster. We do that with our Access to Capital program, 504 and 78 loan guarantee, our wonderful, wonderful resource partner network, Jacksonville Women's Business Center, SCORE, Florida Small Business Development Center, and our VBOT for our veterans. And of course, we help with disaster and some grants in our federal government contracting program. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Jackie so she can get you all started after she tells you about the Jacksonville Women's Business Center.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Thaddeus. And good morning, everybody. I am Jackie Peralta. I am the director of the Jacksonville Women's Business Center. Like Thaddeus mentioned, we're excited to host this quarterly forum that we bring to you throughout the year in partnership with the SBA North Florida District Office. The Women's Business Center serves Jacksonville in the 7-county region, but we are not limited to that because of technology. If you can imagine, this last year, we have embarked on a digital transformation. And what's nice is we're able to offer these programs virtually, as well as be able to provide you with an online classroom and help desk afterwards. So just know that today's presentation is being recorded. We will have a forum in an online classroom for you after the fact. And we'll have a survey for you to take at the end of today's session as well to provide us with any feedback and future programming opportunities. So with that, just want to get started with today's program. I am going to just show you the slide of just all of those who are participating today. So the Small Business Administration and the Women's Business Center co-sponsoring this quarterly forum. We've got Action Coach, Business Coaching, Franchise Experts, Fran-Net, and SCORE Jacksonville chapter to be able to present today's offerings. The quarterly forum, as mentioned again, the Franchise Net, Action Coach, and SCORE. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Marshall Reddy. So Marshall is the president of Franchise Network, Inc. He has over 27 years experience in the franchise industry and 39 years as an entrepreneur. So if you can imagine, he's got a lot of experience that he's able to share and guide you with on this journey. He's been featured in Career Changers Manual, which is Samuel Greenard, and he's been at the top 50 Advantage Business magazine. Thank you, Marshall, for being here today. With that, we'll let you take it away, and I'm going to spotlight your video for everybody. All right.
Well, thank you, Jackie, very much, and Thaddeus, for the invite to participate with your quarterly summit today. My part of the presentation is going to probably be about 45 or 50 minutes. Prior to this, the start of this, I asked Thaddeus and Jackie, like, who was the audience today? And having been working with folks for so many, many years, I always want to know who's sitting out there. And primarily, most of the folks that are on this webinar today, I think, are already business owners. There may be some that are thinking about it. or you may have friends that are dreaming about doing something on their own, but haven't made that leap of faith, maybe like you have. So today is just going to be kind of an overview of business ownership, kind of the whys people do it, the different ways you can do it. We'll talk a little bit about that. It's certainly not going to be an exhaustive survey on business ownership. I don't think anyone wants to hear that. And that's not the forum for this. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, Jackie, do the next slide, please. Our agenda, thank you. Our agenda, which is, kind of why business ownership, options for getting into it, the risk, rewards, etc. So let me tell you about how I got started here. I got fired 40 years ago after working myself through college, like a lot of people do. And after I went through that range of emotions, I finally came full circle back to anger, which apparently is a good driving emotion for me, because it just didn't make sense. I grew up in the military world, and I had learned that you do this, you do that, and then you go take a job, and 500 years later you walk out with a gold watch and you retire. And that was the mantra that I had heard from my father over the years, and that really didn't happen. So I'd like to say I had this great desire to be an entrepreneur early on in life, but I didn't. And ironically, with most of the folks that I have worked with over almost 30 years now, most of them, to a person, that was not their dream either. There was a driving force that directed them to change their path. And so that may be what happened for some of you. But for me, I would consider myself more of an accidental entrepreneur. I've had 3 different companies. They were all startups. They were all successful. But if you're a business owner, you're going to probably understand what I'm going to say, which is there have been days and almost 40 years where I kind of questioned my decision making as to whether or not this was the right way to go or not. Fortunately, those days have been few and far between. And I've realized that, doing things on my own and working for myself and helping people is really kind of where I need to be. And if you're a business owner, you probably feel the same way. Next slide, Jackie. So who is my group? I'm an equity partner in FranNet. We are a international consulting group. Probably the best way to think of us is we're kind of like eHarmony of franchising. I think most people understand eHarmony and how they have designed their platform, meaning they profile individuals that are looking for a date or a significant other. And that's what we do. We happen to be in the franchising space, but we also are a profiling company. We have a proprietary profile which we use, and it comes back as 15 pages on an individual. And that's my starting point with folks. So think of me as eHarmony of franchising. We're not ever going to talk about specific franchises in that first meeting. If I'm working with someone, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of figure out what makes you tick, what you're trying to achieve, what your personality is, what your goals are, etc. So we have worked with lots of different people over the years. We work with SCORE. We just, a matter of fact, did a national workshop with SCORE earlier this week. We work with the SBA, we work with the SBDCs. So we're very big on educating and helping people find the resources so they can make a good decision. My background, I'm also a business broker. I'm also a real estate broker and a franchise broker or matchmaker consultant. So I wear a lot of different hats, and I like that because I think diversity is the spice of life. Next. So the elephant in the room. I've been doing workshops all over Florida. I've done them in the Middle East. I've done them in South Africa, places that I was invited to speak on franchising, because franchising is not just a domestic business model. It's an international model. And oftentimes people have some misunderstandings of how it works or how it might work for them. One thing I have found that is true across the board, wherever I have spoken around the world, is there's always the elephant in the room. And depending on who you are, you're going to have a different thought process here. But I took this wording from a book called, the book was named The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch, who was a IT computer expert who worked at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. And he wrote a book called The Last Lecture, which is, if you are a tenured professor and you are giving your last lecture at the university, everyone comes to it because that's obviously your last lecture. But in his particular instance, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and he was dying. And how does that relate to what we're going to talk about today? One of the things that he talked about in the book was, what's the elephant in the room? And the elephant in the room, when I'm talking to folks about business ownership, potentially going into business, staying in business, taking a different job, the elephant in the room is always different for most, but it usually comes back to one thing, and it's fear. And so any of you that have children understand that most kids, unfortunately, don't seem to have a big fear factor, and they end up in places that we as adults sometimes don't want to see them in. So Brahma bull, little boy standing there, that's not me. I have a black cowboy hat, not a white one. But, the elephant in the room when we're talking about business ownership is typically fear and risk. Next slide, Jackie. So let's go ahead and address some of those concerns. And again, for you folks that are already in business, you already understand all of this. There was a compelling reason why you went into business. For others that are maybe considering this, or maybe friends of yours that might be considering this, let's just face it, fear does two things. It either paralyzes us or it empowers us. For me, 40 years ago, I lost a job. I did not have any clue what I was going to do. I didn't know what I didn't know, but what I did figure out is I knew where I did not want to go back, which was someone else telling me when and where and how I was going to live my life. Fast forward to the last 30 years and working with folks, that seems to be a mantra that I hear from a lot of them. They want to control their life at a certain level. They want to be able to make their decisions, and they want to control their income. They want to have perhaps a better life, and they feel maybe owning a business is the direction to do that. All of that said, sounds great. How do we mitigate the risk and at the same time become an entrepreneur? And I think that's where the franchising model starts to resonate with a lot of folks. So when we start talking about the elephant in the room, let's talk about there's risk when it comes to starting your own business. It costs money. You have to have knowledge. You have to have skills. All of those things are part and parcel of running a successful business. One of the things that you'll find in the franchising models is a lot of those components of a business are provided with you and to you as a franchisee. Next. So where have we been for the last now year and a half, COVID-19. Last year was very interesting for all of us. As an entrepreneur myself, I can assure you that there were some days I didn't know if the sky was up, if the sky was down. I didn't know where we were going. But I thought somehow, Lord willing, we'll all survive it. And so far we have. Next. So go ahead and click again. What I have found in 30 years of consulting with folks, there's never going to be a perfect time. The sky is not going to, the clouds aren't going to separate and, from the heaven above, a message is going to come that says this is the day to change jobs or start your own business. It's never going to happen. There's always going to be an event. And what I have found over the years is, here's an example. Yeah, with the dot-com bust, I went through 9/11, the Great Recession, SARS, H1N1, COVID. Anyone that's been in business, you've experienced all these events as well. Right now, COVID seems to be the current one. I can assure you there will be something else that comes next year or the year after or whatever. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to understand that there are things that are going to be out of our control. You have to be as prepared as you can be, but understand they're going to happen. And that's just part and parcel of either working for someone or working for yourself. So my suggestion is you always kind of create a ladder. For me, I wanted to create my own ladder. So 40 years ago, when I realized this wasn't working and I couldn't find a job, I decided to start something on my own. So I created my own ladder, and that's what I always suggest to individuals that I sit down with. And who are my typical clients? I have worked with folks that have transitioned out of the military as enlisted. I've worked with folks that have transitioned out of the military that have come from the academies. I've worked with teachers, firemen, mid-level managers, senior level managers, CEOs, presidents of companies. 20% of my clients are Harvard, MBA, Stanford, Wharton. I've worked with all of them. Not one of them to a person ever felt they would be out of a job. And then one day they were. So creating your own ladder is important wherever you are at this juncture of your life. Oftentimes, especially last year, one of the things we started to want to look at was what businesses do well in bad times just versus just good times. You know, what's the overhead going to be? You know, is it a service-based business or is it a business where people are coming to me? Next slide. So in the last year, of course, we had lots of different surveys that people conducted. Here's one. The next two slides basically are a survey asking people, do you think this is a good time to go into business? You can read what the slide said. The majority of people said, yeah, I think this probably is. Now, we're in the middle of COVID and people are still optimistic saying, I think this is a great time to do this. Next. So I had three groups of people last year. I had one group that absolutely, as soon as COVID started in March, which is when we kind of stopped the whole world, they hit the brakes and they said, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to stop. I had another group that said, you know what? I still want to do something on my own. Not quite sure what that might be, but I think that I'll continue my research. And then I had another group that said, I think this is an unbelievable time. And that's the glass half full versus the glass half empty. Now, I'm a real estate broker as well and have been for 20 plus years. 4 or 5 years ago, if you went and needed a retail spot in any of our better strip centers in this town, you weren't going to get a spot, because if you didn't take the offer that the landlord was going to provide, there were 50 people standing behind you. Last year, that kind of changed, and there became a lot of real estate availability. And so for my folks that were full speed ahead, if they had a destination type business, i.e. people coming to them, they recognized they were probably going to be able to get some real estate options that were not available even a year earlier. So using the time, my suggestion to all my folks last year and this year as well is, you're going to hit one of these three groups. Where do you feel most comfortable? There's no right or wrong. It's just, where are you most comfortable? Again, the majority of my clients were in the middle or full speed ahead. A couple of them did hit the brakes. Next. You can go to the next one. So perception of job and risk. So my dad was a World War II veteran. My mother was a WAC in the Army, which is the Women's Auxiliary Corps. My brother was Vietnam era. You know, for my dad, his mindset was the Industrial Revolution mindset, meaning, you know, he was older. And so he was one of those folks that believed that you go take a job and you work in that job, and then 30 or 40 years later, you retire from the job and you go and enjoy your retirement. If you have some older parents, that may be some of the same things that you heard. Unfortunately, that's not really how the world works anymore today. And if you've been displaced once, twice, 3 or 4 times, I think right now the max that I've had for one client was he was displaced 5 times in 3 years. You start realizing, hey, I don't think I'm going to be here very, very long. Next slide, Jackie. The reality is this. Now, again, I have worked in every outplacement firm throughout Florida over the last 30 years. And I've worked with lots of people that never in a million years thought they would lose their job. They held the trophy the year before because they were the #1 in their division for whatever they were doing. But the reality is this. Today, the job security mantra isn't there. It's an anomaly if you are in a job for 5, 6, 7, 8, or 10 years anymore. Reality is, as of 2020, the average job was 4.1 years. So if I go back to what my dad was saying, which is, hey, go work for someone, work there your whole life, then retire, that's not going to happen. The reality is more people are going to have more jobs in today's working environment than ever before. So then the question you have to ask yourself, and especially if you're already an entrepreneur on this webinar, do you want to create your own safety and job security, or do you still believe someone else is going to create that for you? Next. So the career paths of yesteryear, so looks familiar, sounds great, be wonderful to have. And there are some people that still have that, but they are the anomalies. Next. Here's what we have today. The average job is 4.1 years and 4.6 years before that. The reality is most people are going to have 14, 15 jobs in their career. If you're comfortable with that, then you need to stay in the corporate environment. If you're not, and you think that, you know, in a horse race, I'm going to bet on myself, then that's where becoming an entrepreneur probably starts to make more sense. Tony Robbins, which a lot of people are very familiar with, I'm not a big advocate of Tony Robbins, but I did attend one of his weekend workshops years and years ago. The one thing that I took out of that I've never forgotten is there's 2 driving emotions that we all use to make any decision in life. And that is pain or pleasure. So I'll use myself as an example. For me, my pain was I don't have a job, I can't find a job, and now I'm getting angry about that. So my pain was not having employment. My pleasure was if I go do something on my own and take control of my life, that appears to me to be something that'll be a lot more enjoyable. So whatever decisions that you or I make based on any decision, whether it be a car, dating someone, marrying someone, whatever, pain and pleasure are the 2 driving emotions that drive pretty much every decision that we make. And I found that to be true with a lot of folks that I've worked with over the last 30 years. How much pain do they associate from where they were, and how much pleasure will they associate if they go do something different, whether it be another job or do something for themselves? Next. So the motivation to own a business, this was a survey that was done by a group we work with, Guidant. It's pretty self-explanatory. Again, if you're in business for yourself, a lot of this might make sense. For me, I was group 12%. I was laid off, outsourced, replaced, whatever. 40 years ago that we didn't have, great HR departments that had these great terminologies. I was fired, and I was fired by U.S. Postal Service with the mail. So for a lot of folks, maybe it's dissatisfaction, maybe an opportunity presented it themselves. Again, over the years, I've had people that will tell me, you know what, I hated my job the last 2 years. I hated it, but it was the golden handcuffs. And how can I walk away from a job that's paying me X and giving me health care and I'm able to support my family? And I totally understand that. I would have never probably gone and become an entrepreneur had something horrendous not happened to me. So everyone has a different reason why they want to pursue either a new job or pursue a business for themselves. Maybe in the chat box, it'd be interesting to kind of get some response from some of you folks that are entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs. Next. Small business, what is it? 99% of the companies that we run into are considered small. 2/3 of all new net jobs come from small companies. 5% of business owners were unemployed the year before. I was one of them. And according to the book, The Millionaire Next Door, it's the way that 5 out of 6 people became financially secure. Now, what that does not tell you is that most of those folks became financially secure when they sold their business. So as a business broker, one of the things that I always ask people, especially when we're talking about the franchising part of their dream, is, what's your exit strategy? You're going to buy your business, or you're going to build a business, and then you're going to sell that business. If you look at a lot of really, really successful entrepreneurs in the world, that's their pattern. They buy it, they build it, they sell it. So if you're a business owner now, that is a mantra you need to kind of put in place. And I'm so happy that we were able to have Steve Goranson that's going to chat a little bit about what he does later on, because that's what he does. He helps people. Craig Linsky with SCORE, that's a great resource. That's what they do. They help people kind of figure out, their strategies. And then, of course, the SBA, and then Jackie at the Women's Business Center. These are all resources that everyone should use, because these are really, really sharp people that don't have an agenda other than to help you in some of the decisions that you're going to make. Next. So why business ownership? This is a question I've asked people face to face, and I will ask them when I'm doing, workshops where there's actually people in the audience, which hasn't happened in the last almost 2 years. But, more often than not, the answers that come back are in these boxes. People want success, they want fulfillment, maybe they want independence, they want control. For me, my drivers were, I wanted control. The next time I got fired, I was going to fire myself. I haven't done that yet, but I'm looking forward to that day because it's empowering. And when you become an entrepreneur, this is all about you. It's about your decisions. It's about taking control of your life and taking the boat where you want to take it versus someone else taking it for you. Now, we're talking about business ownership. I'm talking with a lot of folks that are already business owners. This is probably going to surprise you. I don't think most people should ever go into business for themselves. It's scary. It's hard. It's not this skies are always blue. It's difficult. And unless you understand that, you won't be successful. You've got to be in it for the long haul. So there have been times over the last 30 years where I will tell people or suggest to them that maybe they not consider this as an option. I hate saying that, but you have to be honest with folks. But for those folks that truly want to take control of their life, they're going to hit most of these boxes here. For me, it's control, it was financial security, and I wanted flexibility. In one of my companies, I traveled Monday through Friday for 5 years. I came home on a Friday or a Saturday, I left on a Sunday, or I left on a Monday. I had a very successful company, but the reality was it was just an existence. And then that's when I transitioned into another business that allowed me to stay home more, and I had a partner in that business. So depending on where you are in your business life, maybe some of these boxes will correspond. Next. Business ownership options. You can start a business from scratch. I've done that 3 times. It's exciting, it's fun, and it's very scary. You can buy an existing business. That's fantastic, but you better make sure you have a good CPA looking at your books and your best and your interest, or you can buy a franchise. Next. So real quickly, starting a business. We all know it because if you're already an entrepreneur and you started a business, you know all of these. You have total control, you make all the decisions, lots of creativity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The disadvantages, you've got to create all of the systems. And what's the rule or the number that I've heard? It's been all over, but 80–90% of all startups fail. And typically it's the lack of capital or lack of management skills. So that said, any franchise system that you would look at that's successful, someone started it from scratch and created a system that worked. So there are very successful startups, and there's probably a number of people that are on this webinar that are very successful that started from scratch. But so here's one way to do it. Next. You can buy the existing business, the advantages, cash flow, goodwill, actual results, etc. You know, one of the things that I've learned over the years is there are no rules when you're buying an existing business. And from a business broker standpoint, I would be more of a concierge business broker, meaning I rarely will take a list. I will never actually take a listing from a business that's for sale unless I've seen the financials and we've been able to validate the financials. If an owner tells me they're selling because they're sick, I'm probably not going to take that either, because more often than not, that doesn't seem to be true. So if you're looking to buy an existing business, and there are certainly some advantages to do that, make sure that you have a good CPA. If they provide you, i.e. the seller, with audited financial statements, don't believe them until your CPA confirms it, because I've had that disaster before as well. Make sure that you are chatting with people like Craig Linsky from SCORE, people from the SBA, and other professionals, so you have a good understanding exactly of what you're buying and what set of books that you are looking at. Next. Buying a franchise. So that's been my primary focus for the last 30 years. Is franchising the right model for everybody? Absolutely not. But if you like being part of a system, if you don't want to recreate the wheel, if you don't want to take 5 or 6 or 7 years to ramp your business up, then the franchising model probably should resonate. The way I like to look at the franchising model is pretty simple. If you are at a circus, and we've all gone to the circus, sometimes you have that high wire act and there is a person on that high wire and there's no net. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, boy, if they fall, that's going to really hurt. And then other times they'll have the high wire act and there'll be a net and you're thinking, well, if they fall, they're just going to hit the net. That's kind of how I want you to think about franchising. You're going to have some missteps in business, in the term of owning your business. If it's a franchise, you'll have missteps too. But the difference here is you're going to have a system, you're going to have support, you're going to have guidance, you're going to have help to get you back on that wire and hopefully avoid too many other missteps. And I think that's an advantage for a lot of folks. Most people that I work with that are transitioning out of the corporate world that have never owned a business, this business model, the franchising model, works for them because it allows them to become an entrepreneur, a dream they've always had, but at the same time, it allows them to be part of a system, i.e. they're coming out of the corporate community, so they had a system and support behind them. So it kind of gives them the best of both worlds. So it's a bridge model, and they start to understand that. One misnomer about franchising that I've heard way too many times: if I'm a franchisee, I don't actually own my own business. And that is categorically 100% incorrect. You are a strategic partner within a system. If and when you decide to sell your business, the money that you sell that franchise for goes into your bank account, not into the franchisor's bank account. So you absolutely are a business owner, but you have some advantages because you have a system behind you, and most people like being part of a system. Next. So what is it? It's a license to use my trademark, my systems, my brand. I'm going to convey it to you. And if it's the right fit, meaning that your profile matches our profile with what we look for and who our successful franchisees are, then this can be a wonderful marriage. The only way a franchisor grows is by having happy franchisees. So it's important and imperative that a franchisor find people that fit their systems so that they will be good validators for that franchisor in the future. Within my group, we spend about 4 to 5 months vetting any franchise company that we will work with, and we work with roughly 250 different companies worldwide. So we don't believe in one size fits all. We want to make sure that the franchisor is solid, that their systems are solid, and what they're trying to achieve and what they're bringing to the table is something that can be validated. Next. Why people choose franchising, you can read this too. If you're married, you have one reason why you choose it. If you're single, that's another reason. It's pretty self-explanatory. At the end of the day, some people want more quality of life. Others want earnings potential. Some want a little bit of both. I don't know where you might fall, but again, when you're starting to talk about business ownership, the reason why people want to do it is they want to control their life, they want to control their income, they want to control their vacation schedule, they want to control their future. Each one's just going to have a different ratio as to what's more important versus less important. Next. Who buys a franchise? That's another misnomer. Everyone thinks, gosh, you have to be a multimillionaire to do it. Nope. So here's a kind of a graphical interface. 16% are C-level people, 14 are VP level, directors, managers, others are attorneys, doctors, engineers. So it comes from a wide range of backgrounds. The one thing that is consistent that I have found over 30 years, people that go into business for themselves, they have a desire to change their life. That's the one commonality. They may not know what that is, what it looks like, what the business might be, but they do know they want to change the direction of their life and they're willing to do something about it. All of them, for the most part, are risk adverse, fun to talk about, but it gets scary and scarier and scarier, especially when they get close to signing a franchise agreement. So the elephant in the room is this is fun, but it's also going to be scary, and that's normal. So that's who buys. Next. The last 5-6 years, who are the bigger buyers in franchising and business ownership? Females. Women's Business Center with Jackie. This is, I mean, you already know this. I work with more women now than I ever did in the last 20 years. I'm starting to see younger people that are getting involved. They have some money from some sources, maybe from their job, maybe from their family. They don't want to work for somebody their whole life. And so they're thinking, maybe I'll start a little bit earlier. I know my first business, I think I was 24 or 25. And as noted, I had no clue what I was doing. I just knew where I did not want to go back to. So starting to see younger people, veterans account for about 3 or 4% of franchise ownership today. And a veteran makes a great business owner because they're used to following guidance, instruction, having a plan of action, and executing that plan of action. If you're good at implementing a plan of action and executing that plan, then franchising is a fantastic business space to look at because that's what it is. Next. Next. So how it works, you have a systematic system that's already in place. You have experience, simplicity. You're not going to find a nuclear engineering franchise. It's not out there. So if that's been your passion, it's not going to happen. Most franchise companies, it has to be something that's easy to implement. It's a simple business model. And what they're looking for is someone that can implement that plan of action. They're going to teach you, they're going to train you initially, ongoing, and then after you buy. Because again, the key with any successful franchise system is supporting the franchisees so you are more successful. The more successful you are, the more successful the franchisor is. The more successful the franchisor is, the more valuable your asset, your franchise license becomes. Again, you're going to buy it, you're going to build it, you're going to sell it. Average franchisee owns their business about 7 or 8 years, and then they sell that. What I'm seeing more and more of with some of my candidates and clients that I've worked with is about 15% of them now are diversifying. They own one franchise system, they may own multiple units in it, and now they're going to diversify and buy into another franchise system. They want to diversify their holdings, so they've got 2 or 3 different companies that they're running at the same time, usually via managers. And again, the way the franchising model is designed, it's designed to implement a plan of action. So it works because you're not having to create all these systems, name recognition, operating systems, etc. Next. Not all franchises are the same. If you like brand identity and brand awareness and everyone knows the name, by the time that you think you might want to buy that business, i.e. McDonald's, it will never happen. Brand awareness is great, but what's more important to me and to a lot of the candidates I've worked with over the years is, can I take a business that I saw maybe in a different city and I loved and it was successful, can I take that same business and plant it in the area that I live in? So a successful business that doesn't necessarily have name recognition, but has strong validation and great systems in place, more often than not, that's what more people are interested in because you have more opportunity there. Next. Finding your perfect fit. This is pretty straightforward. Am I willing to follow the franchisor system? Is it affordable? Risk level acceptable? Will I enjoy it? Finding your fit. What is your function versus what the business does? Are you going to be an owner-operator or are you going to be a semi-business operator? I've got both. I have folks that are working day-to-day and I have folks that are semi-absentee owners that in some instances they have full-time jobs and they're building their business on the side via their managers. Probably in the last 4 or 5 years, I've had more folks that have gone towards the semi-absentee business model more so than the owner operating model. There's no right or wrong, it's just that's what they wanted to do, and there are business models out there that work like that. Next. What's right for you? And these are some of the things that I go through when I'm doing the profile with you. You know, are you going to have employees? What types of customers are they? Are they business customers or are they residential customers? Is it a service? Is it a product? Full-time, part-time hours, number of units? Do I want 1? Do I want 5? There's no right or wrong. Last year, one of my clients that I worked with down in South Florida, again, middle of the pandemic, he bought all of South Florida for a franchise. And you were thinking, you know, we're going through a pandemic now. And his mindset was, I see more opportunity now than I've ever seen before. And so for this particular franchise, which by the way, he told me he had no interest in that particular business space at all. He said, I have no interest in the XYZ space. After going through his profile, he bought all of South Florida for the XYZ space. So sitting down, we're going to get to know you, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, what your business preferences are, and then look at concepts that fit that. Next. Your transferable business skills. If you've been in management, if you've been in IT, if you've been in marketing, sales, all of those skill sets are transferable. They're transferable to you. And so from a franchisee perspective, those skill sets are married to a successful franchisor that already has a system in place. You're going to marry your skill sets with their skill sets. If it's the right marriage, then you take off like a rocket ship At least that's the goal. Next. What's important to you? Challenge, recognition, prestige, build equity for retirement. Everyone has a different reason why they do this. For me, it was control, financial security, flexibility. Honestly, I don't care about brand identity and brand awareness. I don't care. I want a business that's honest and ethical, that can make a difference, that can help people. Branding, I don't care about that. That's insignificant to me. For others, that's very, very important too. But we figure that out when we're going through the profile. Next. Government disclosure. So in 1979, the federal government in the United States got involved with franchising. And one of the things they came out with was some mandatory disclosure documents. This FDD used to be called an FTC, I forget what they call it now, but it's now the FDD. And that's the franchise disclosure document that every franchisor in America has to provide. It used to be called a UFOC, a Uniform Offering Circular, but now it's an FDD. Think of it as a prospectus from a publicly traded company. It's going to give you quite a bit of information. In the state of Florida, it's going to be 23 separate sections. It's going to tell you a lot about the company, who the company founders are, what their background is, any litigation, et cetera, et cetera. Next. It's going to talk to you about current franchisees. So let's say that you're thinking about buying a business, but you're not quite sure. You heard what the franchisor is telling you, but is it true? Would it be helpful to be able to talk to current franchisees that are in that business, that sat at that same table? Would it be beneficial to talk to maybe some people that have left that franchise? That's all part of the FDD. If there's any type of earnings information, meaning how much money can I make, that will be there as well. Note that about 30–35% of franchise companies will make an earnings claim. Most will not. Whether they do or whether they don't, I don't care. I want to get that information from people that are doing it, i.e. the franchisees. Next. Some franchising myths. We'll wrap this up pretty quickly. Next slide. Franchising is only fast food and retail. If I were to say, pick 3 franchises that come to mind, and this was a face-to-face workshop, it's always going to be McDonald's. I'll hear Burger King more often than not. I'll hear Starbucks, which isn't a franchise, but it's almost always food orientated. Next. The reality is there's 3,600 different franchise companies, probably more than that today, 90 different industries, 900,000 different operating units. If you can think of a business category, there's probably somebody that created a franchise model within that category. Again, one size does not fit all. I don't believe in throwing the dart at the dartboard. I believe in starting with a profile. I believe in getting to know someone. And then from that, determining here are the areas that probably we should look at first, because they probably give you the greatest chances of success. So when you're thinking about business ownership or you're thinking about franchising, don't think of just food only. That's a majority, maybe 1,500 of those companies are food, but there are lots of different options. Next. Franchises succeed because of the quality of the product. Next. We all know this. Everyone on this webinar probably makes a better hamburger than McDonald's, but we probably cannot outmarket McDonald's. We can't put the systems in place like Ray Kroc did with McDonald's. So it's not necessarily the product. The product has to be good. It has to be tolerable. But at the end of the day, it goes back to marketing and systems that are put in place by that company that you're able to implement that will translate hopefully into success. Next. I already went through that and go to the next slide. Franchises emerge from new industries with no competitors. So FranNet started 33, 34 years ago. At that time, there was really no one in the franchise consulting space. And so we kind of created our own industry. If you go back into the old wild, wild west days, one of the things I used to say is, how do you figure out who a pioneer is? Well, the pioneer was always the one that had the arrows in their back. So if you create something new, you won't be new forever, because there's always going to be someone that's going to look at what you're doing and they're going to say, hey, I like that space, but I think we can build a better mousetrap. I think we can change this or change that. So if you're thinking about going into business, or you're currently in business, don't ever make the assumption that competition is not going to be there, because it will be. What you need to figure out is, how do I get my piece of the pie to compete in my marketplace that I can live with? That's what you need to figure out. And as a franchisee, every one of the franchisees that you possibly would speak to would have had that same concern. How do they compete in their market? How does the franchisor differentiate themselves from their competitors? Next. You can go to the next slide from there. Franchises are expensive. Next. Yeah, they are. If you buy in the food business, a McDonald's is probably a couple $1 million. Burger King's probably going to fall in the same spot. The reality is 11% or under 50,000. That's total investment. That's franchise fee. That's working capital, licensing, etc. 27% are under 100,000. A majority are under 250,000. So you don't have to be a multimillionaire to get into the franchising space. Typically, how much you need, go back to that next slide. Typically, you need about 20, 25, 30% of your investment, and then leverage the remaining part through different sources. Go to the next slide. What most people are doing these days in the last few years, personal savings, friends, partners, relatives. I've got that right now with a mother that's going to finance her daughter and her son-in-law. Lines of credit are now coming back in vogue. Seller financing, if it's a resale. 85% of the folks that I've worked with over the last 5, 6, 7 years have used part of their 401k or non-Roth IRA to seed their business. I work with companies that will help you do a rollover, which allows you access to your 401k or IRA without paying any penalties. And so that oftentimes is the seed money. And then if conventional funding is necessary, a lot of these companies also work with banks throughout the United States, and they will help you package your loan. If it's going to be an SBA guarantee loan, they'll help you package that together. The fact that we are on a webinar with SCORE and with the SBA, use their resources. These are unbelievable people. So this is kind of how people are funding their businesses these days. Next. High return requires high investment. Next. Anyone that tells you to spend every last penny that you have, especially if they're a broker, is looking at their fee and they're not looking at it from your perspective. My goal with anyone that I've worked with over the last 30 years is pretty straightforward. I want you to spend the least and find the business where you can make the most. And that's a mantra that I've stuck with. And to date, no one has ever really refuted like that's a bad idea. So service businesses have a tendency to be the less of an investment. Because they're less of an investment doesn't mean that you cannot make a lot of money from them. And everyone has a different definition of a lot of money. If I speak to you one-on-one, we can chat more about that. But what you spend is not indicative to what you get back. Just remember that. Next. Industry experience is required. Next. Typically that's true, but when you're looking at a franchising model, the franchisor oftentimes doesn't want somebody with a lot of industry experience. They want your skill sets, marketing, IT, management, supply chain, etc. If you have that, they can teach and train you with what their business is. They are your educator, and they will help you figure out what steps you need to do, what processes you need to implement to get to that next step and that next level. Next. Resources. Probably of those 3 books, the one I like the most is the E-Myth Revisited. I believe in educating people. I believe in using outside advisors because that makes for a better decision. The E-Myth, though, would be of the 3 books that I would probably recommend. It's a very, very good book. So if you're thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, certainly a must read. If you already are an entrepreneur, I think it will help you kind of determine or change how your business, how you might run your business into the future. Next. Here's my additional information. If you need or want to chat with me, feel free to check out my website. I've got a number of blog articles that I put on there. I put on a new one every month. I'm getting ready to post the next one today. I'm local, but I literally work with people from all over the country as well as internationally. So thank you again for participating. And I will now convey this to Steve.
Thank you so much, Marshall. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Steve, our next speaker from Action Coach, Business Coaching. Steve Goranson has owned and operated the North Florida office. Oh, hold on one second, Steve. I think you are sharing yours.
Steve is going to share his own slides.
Okay. So Steve has owned and operated the North Florida office of Action Coach Business Coaching since 2004. Established in 1993, Action Coach is the world's largest coaching franchise with over 1,000 offices in 70 different countries. They coach over 15,000 businesses each week across the globe. Action Coach offers a change of lifestyle, the opportunity to make more money, and an improved work-life balance, helping business owners work smarter, not harder. Action Coach doesn't offer the quick fix. It promises a change of lifestyle for those that use and embrace its systems and culture. Steve has lived in Jacksonville for over 30 years with his wife, Sherry, and 4 kids. Over the years, he has worked with small business owners in the area of sales, advertising, marketing, and marketing research. Steve's vision is to bring success and prosperity to Northeast Florida through business re-education. He is committed to helping business owners make a better life for themselves and their families. All right, Steve, you can go ahead and you're sharing your screen. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Just want to make sure, hold on one second to get things going here. So really want to thank everybody here, Thaddeus, and also Marshall for inviting me here to be able to share my story. And it's really, and also plus Marshall wanted me to share with you the Action Coach 6 steps process of building a better business. But what I wanted to first do is talk to you a little bit about why did I buy a franchise? You see, my background is, as you heard, my background's in sales, advertising, marketing research. And after 25, 30 years, I just felt burnt out, and I started speaking with one of my business mentors, and she asked me, well, what are your goals? What are your long-term goals? And, to be honest, I've been focusing mostly on my short-term goals of what I needed to do to be successful, and really hadn't thought about my long-term goals in quite a while. In fact, actually, my wife and I, we set long-term goals for ourselves when we got married. Right now, it was like 30-some years ago or whatever, but we never looked at them since. So she said, well, hey, you know what, Steve, that's a good place to start. So the funny thing was, I actually knew where the notebook was and in what box in the garage I packed these goals away. So one night we pulled it out, popped open a bottle of wine, and we started looking through these goals that we set, some 30 years before that. And the funny thing that we found was that we actually reached all of these goals, and the ones that we didn't, we were trying to figure out what the heck were we actually even thinking of when we set those goals. So the thing that I want to do is, so that's when I really decided that I wanted to start a business. And, and the thing about really when it comes down to it, the funny thing is that, I started to say, hey, I want to start my business. And then it seems like the universe was listening, because the next week I got a call from an Action Coach recruiter. Actually back then, Action Coach has been around for almost 28 years right now. that we were called Action International, and said, "Hey, Steve, have you ever thought about being a coach?" And my first reaction was, "What's that?" Because now everybody calls themselves a coach, but 17, 20 years ago, that term wasn't used that much. So I had a couple of thoughts. First one was, hey, yeah, I can do that. That sounds interesting. I've always sort of been somebody that's been a consultant self, always wanted to try to help my clients. And then my second thought was, why do I need them? Why do I need this franchise? I could do this myself, and then my third point was, hey, if they're talking to me, they're probably talking to other people. So I needed to learn as much about them as possible. So I started part of the due diligence and the discovery calls that they had. And what I found out was I really enjoyed everybody within the system, within Action Coach that I met. And it's really, make a long story short, instead of reinventing the wheel, I decided to invest in it and to buy the wheel instead. And that's probably been one of the best decisions that I made, that because they gave me all the tools that I needed to be successful as a coach. And I've been doing this now since 2004. And it's probably been one of the most rewarding things that I've done in my career over the years. And for a lot of business owners, owning a business sort of will suck the life out of you. I don't know if anybody here has sort of had that feeling if you've been in business for a while. And the system that I bought through Action Coach is a simple process to get your business to work harder so you don't have to, right? And this process is really to create a business that could work without you. And it's the same process. Even if you wanted to create a franchise, you have to do this, because what's a franchise is a business with systems that somebody else can run, right? So how do we become successful? If you want success, there's three different things that you need. We need motivation, we need knowledge, and we need implementation, right? So what's motivation? Motivation is important. This is where we answer the question of, why do I do what I do? This is where we go to seminar, maybe TED Talks. Life coaching is really good on this in these areas. In all these areas, we're trying to connect to our why and to get us excited about what we do. But the thing is motivation without knowledge is useless. Someone once told me this: what do you get when you motivate a dummy? You just get a motivated dummy, right? So now, what is knowledge? Knowledge is about learning how. This is where we go to workshops, classes. This is where the SBDC and the Women's Business Center does a great job of educating business owners. But if you have motivation and knowledge, but take no action, you don't get any results. So the third part is implementation. And this is about what I do when. And what we teach at Action Coach is we actually offer our clients all three of these. We provide motivation and accountability to make sure that their goals are implemented. So when it comes to success, everybody here, we've all had a success, right? And we don't get there by taking big leaps. It's the consistency of doing the small things that we do every day that leads to our success. Others might see people as an overnight success, but they know it didn't happen overnight. It took many days, and for entrepreneurs, know it as many nights of doing those small things nobody likes doing. And the founder of Action Coach, Brad Sugars, he says running a business doesn't get easier. You have to get better at business. So business is easy if you know the methodologies or the systems to do it. And that's part of the advantage of buying a franchise, is you don't have to reinvent the wheel to be able to be successful. And this is important, because over the past years, I've been offering, with COVID and all that, I've been offering a lot of free business coaching to help business owners all throughout our area. And then that's actually one of the ways that Marshall and I had met through some of the programs that I've been offering. So let's talk into one of the things that I taught Marshall was our 6 steps. So usually when I'm starting to work with a business owner, we're spending a lot of time, or they're spending a lot of time putting out fires instead of working on strategies to build that more valuable and, most importantly, a sellable business. So one of the things I really start talking to them is, what does your business look like when it's done? And they usually get this, what do you mean by that? When it's done? When the business starts working without you, because that's what you're trying to build. And sometimes you could buy a franchise that has all that packaged up for you, right? You know, but the challenge that most business owners have is they don't know where to begin. And this is part of where this 6-step process really helps business owners. So the first step of the 6 steps all starts as the base level. This is where we use the term mastery. Mastery is broken down into 4 different areas. You know, and really it's about eliminating chaos. You know, so we want to really start with destination mastery, which is where we're going with our business, our goals. Next is time mastery, this is where we're dealing with our productivity. Then delivery mastery, about how making sure that we get our customers get what we need. And then last really is money mastery, of course, is understanding our numbers in the business, cash flow, break even, the pricing. And I believe the next speakers are really going to get into more detail into that itself. But the next we go into niche. This is about creating predictable cash flow in your business. You know, this is where we kick up into the marketing side of things. You know, marketing for a lot of people is really sort of get people distracted. They think it's like really way too hard. So what we do is we try to break it down into 5 simple areas. And it's a formula that is really probably the most important thing that we teach our clients, is the 5 ways to leverage your marketing to multiply your bottom line profits. And I'm going to share with you a way that you can learn that formula. I don't have a lot of time to talk about it right now. But then the next step coming in is creating leverage in your business. This is your systems, right? You know, and what we do is we teach a process for business owners to develop a system-based business that can begin to work without you. You know, and you know, so it's really, this is where we have predictable cash flow. Now we have efficient delivery within our business, but it's ultimately right, the stability, cash time, it's all part of getting that massive results in our business. And then finally we say, hey, you know, I don't run my business, my people do. You know, this is where we begin to build a great team, your dream team. We focus on the 6 keys to winning a team. You know, we're working on attracting smart, motivated people who are now aligned to our vision and our mission. And that's really what allows us to build really what we like to call is a commercial profitable enterprise that works without you, where your team runs it, not you. You know, so now the people are in charge and your business, and they build the business for you, right? So once we begin to implement these 6 keys in your business, you're now starting to attract employees into your business who share your dream and vision, right? A lot of times people go is trying to, you know, how do I go out and find good employees? No, you want to build a business that's going to attract the best to come to you. So once we've hit these 4 levels, these 4 basic levels, we're going to now start looking at how do we turn our business activities into this massive synergistic growth machine, as I like to call it. You know, and you know, the business is now running without you. You know, now you could sit down and you could roll out, expand into multiple locations, a variety of cities around the state, the country, around the world for that matter. It doesn't make a difference. It's really up to the amount of growth and level of growth that you are after. You know, and this is where you could start franchising your business, right? And so now this brings us to a final point in the 6 steps. You know, it's the results. This is about our freedom to sell the business, or the freedom to just let the business run without you, create passive income from your business. It's as simple as that. But the key here is that this is a process. You can't skip steps. Up until team, we're buying back our time. Then, you know, we're making more money. You know, we could start forwarding better systems. We can start to hire a better team. So now the business is working without us, and we start working less. You know, so think about it this way. If you had better systems, if you had a better team, you'd be working less, right? Or, you know, if you had better marketing and a better systems and a better team, you'd be making more money. You know, that's absolutely right. You know, if you had better mastery of that business, the basics of the business, you'd be putting out less fires, and that would help you to be more proactive. So the final thing I just really want to share is that really there is no quick fix. There's no silver bullet that's going to fix everything in a business. there's no one idea that's going to increase your business 100%. But think of it this way. But when you start implementing 100 ideas that just increase your business by 1%, that's synergy. That's how you can double and triple your business. That's when you're starting to work smarter, not harder. You start able to really live life instead of the business sucking away from you. And this is really the process that I bought as part of the franchising that I actually own. And it's been used by thousands of businesses worldwide. So I know I sort of went through this really fast, but I really thank everybody here for the opportunity to share my story. These are ways that you could reach out and connect with me. One I just want to offer everybody is if you want to see where you stand in these 6 steps, there's a free assessment that you can go to on my website. And if you want to go into more details, learn those 5 drivers of profitability, you can go to 6stepstogrowth.com. It's a free half-hour webinar that's doing as part of some of the free coaching that I've been doing over the past year or so, or join me in my Facebook group on the Smarter Business Owners, where I'm offering free coaching. You can connect with other entrepreneurs, and it's just really a community of business owners helping each other. And that's something that I started during COVID. So all this is for free, really. It's my way of giving back to the community, especially during this tough year. And I really thank you guys for the opportunity to share this with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. I am going to share my screen and introduce our next speaker, Craig Linsky. Hold on one second. Let me unmute. All right.
Okay. So do you have my slides, or do I need to bring the deck up and share?
Yes, Craig, I'm going to introduce you, and then I'll have your slides, and you can just tell me next whenever you're ready.
Okay.
All right, everyone. So Craig Linsky is a SCORE mentor and chairman of the Client Education Committee at SCORE in Jacksonville. Craig worked in the financial services industry for nearly 30 years. For the past 10 years, he has designed and taught marketing and other business topics, both domestically through SCORE and internationally through the Financial Services Volunteer Corps. All right, Craig, if you want to just take it away.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. This is probably one of the topics that people consider to be boring, but it is it's a necessity. The understanding your financial statements is really how you determine whether or not your business is succeeding and failing, and where it's not succeeding, what you need to do to fix it. So I know a lot of people don't like to get involved in accounting, but if you're going to be a business owner, or even if you're going to be a franchise owner, you need to understand how the business is performing, and that is done through the financial statements. You can go to the next slide, please. I know the term SCORE has been thrown around a lot, and I thank Marshall for all his kind comments about our SCORE mentors. For those of you who don't know who we are, we're the largest nonprofit organization of free business experts. So we are here to educate you either through the workshops that we put on or through one-on-one mentoring. And this Jacksonville chapter, I think we're up to 71 volunteers now that are in the Jacksonville area. If you are not from Jacksonville, there are 7 chapters in Florida. So if you're down in Miami or near Daytona, there are other chapters available that might be nearer to you. But this chapter itself has done very well lately. We were the district chapter of the year for 2020, and we were we were chosen as a platinum chapter across the entire nation, which puts us in the top 10% of all the chapters. So we've got plenty of people here who can help you out. If you want to go to the next slide. This is how you find that help. If you go to jacksonville.score.org, That is our website. If you are in a different city, they might have a different address, but if you just do an internet search on SCORE near me, you're probably going to come up with the right chapter that's closest to you. You notice there's 3 tabs at the top of the page there. One says Find a Mentor. And so if you do want one-on-one counseling, that is the place to go. You can see out of the Jacksonville, the 71 mentors, you get a bio of what's their professional background. Are they in accounting and marketing or internet, whatever it is. So you can find somebody who's got the background that you're looking for help with. And you can actually sign up for an initial meeting with a mentor. There are scheduled times, so you get a 1-hour slot. The second tab there, register for workshop. We'll finish up with between 140 and 150 workshops this year. We end our year in September 30th. So, that's almost 1 per business day throughout the year. And so we do a lot of different topics and have a lot of people coming in, not only from SCORE, but from outside organizations who have expertise in a given field. So you can go there and check out our workshops and register for any of them. And at this point, at least through the end of September, all of our workshops are free. And then the third is a template. So if you're looking to develop a business plan, there's a business plan template out there. If you need to do your 3-year financial projections month by month, there's a template out there for that. And there's all kinds of other good stuff, webinars, short webinars, Q&A on specific issues. So that might be something if you're looking for information to check out. Okay, to the next slide, please. Okay. This is just some of the workshops that are coming up. There is a 5 workshop series on internet marketing, which starts August 31st. So that's something you might want to consider signing up for. You can sign up for any or all of them, depending on where your knowledge base needs to be. You'll notice September 30th, how to develop a product or service to sell. So for those of you who are still kind of that ideas mode, we try to help you get from the idea to a practical solution, which is the product or service that you can sell into the marketplace. So that's just some of the ones that are coming up. As I mentioned, we do an awful lot of them on an annual basis. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's today's topic. You notice those 3 little pictures there. One says balance sheet, one says income statement, one says cash flow. Those are the 3 that we're going to talk about, with a couple other miscellaneous topics. But those are the ones you really need to understand in order to make sure that your business is on track. So you can go to the next slide, please. Okay. And there's just some key points to keep in mind. And this is going to be, for accounting, but also for basically everything you do in your business. Is number 1, the business has to make a profit to survive. If you lose money continually and there's no vision of profit in the near future, you might want to reconsider what you're doing. Second is, in order to make a profit, your revenues have to exceed your expenses. That may seem very a superficial conclusion, but the problem is that a lot of people don't consider all of their expenses. They don't consider the fact that they're paying to have their website maintained, or their telephone answering service, or any of the other things that are part of your expenses and are detracted from the revenue and lowers your profit. Third is probably one of the most important things to worry about is the cash flow. You can be in a net loss situation and still be cash flow positive. And that's because of something called depreciation, which we'll talk about later on today. But essentially what it boils down to is that when you're out of cash, when that checking account gets down to 0, you're essentially out of business. And what we're trying to do is keep cash flow positive. If you can do that on a consistent basis, month after month after month, you're going to be in pretty good shape business-wise. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, just to start, if you have no background in accounting whatsoever, The cardinal rule of accounting is that the debits are on the left and the credits are on the right. So if you buy an asset, let's say you buy a delivery truck, all right, that increases the accounts under assets. But how did you pay for that truck? Probably cash out of your account. So that will decrease the cash account. And both of those are assets. Your cash is an asset, your delivery van is an asset. Okay. So each category has its own rules for increases and decreases. We're kind of short on time here, so I can't go into all these in detail, but you know, it's kind of the basis. Now, if you don't understand accounting at all, if you don't understand what a general ledger is or how it works, this is the point at which you probably want to get somebody either on staff, or as most people are starting up, they don't have the money to have an accountant on staff. You go out and find yourself a bookkeeper or an accountant who will work on a per hour basis just long enough to get your accounting done for you. But when you do that, make sure that that person that you hire is going to actually be able to sit down with you and discuss the 3 financial statements we're going to get into here and explain to you until you become familiar enough with it to interpret them yourselves. But, you know, if your cash flow is not positive, well, why is it not positive? You want to know the reasons why the numbers are what they are. And pardon me, in order to take the steps to correct those places where you're falling short of your plan. Next slide, please. We have till 12:30, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. There's 2 basic kinds of accounting. The simplest is cash accounting. That simply says that, you know, if I sell something, I bring cash in, I'm going to recognize that sale right away. But if, let's say, I sell on terms that you don't have to pay me for 30 days, you don't recognize that sale until the 30th day when the customer actually gives you the cash. Accrual accounting says if I sell something today and I'm going to give the customer 30 days to pay, I'll recognize that sale today and not wait 30 days, but the sale will take place today. And I will now open an account called accounts receivable, which says that those are my customers who actually owe me money for the sales I've already booked. Okay, so we'll show you an example of that. But essentially, for most people, when they're starting out, the easiest way to do it is simply cash accounting, because if the cash is there, you count it. And if the cash is not there, you don't count it. And that, for most people, that's the easiest way to think about business. When you become more sophisticated, and if you do have a lot of sales that are done on credit, or you're maybe purchasing inventory, and the people you're purchasing that inventory are giving you credit that won't require you to pay for 30 days, then you want to switch over to accrual accounting to recognize things when the events happen, not necessarily when the cash changes hand. Okay. If you are a C Corp, which most of you, I assume, are not, those are usually pretty large corporations, they cannot legally use cash accounting. They have to use accrual accounting. But if you're anything else, if you're a sole proprietorship or an S Corp or a LLC, you can really take your choice between either method of accounting. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here's an example of what we were talking about. If you're doing cash accounting and you sell to a customer $10,000 worth of merchandise, on the day that the transaction actually occurs, which would be in this case January 19, the customer gives you the $10,000 of cash, you deliver the merchandise, and you recognize that $10,000 sale. So everything takes place on the same date. Very simple. But on the other side, on the accrual accounting, let's say that this contract to deliver the merchandise wasn't done on January 19th, it was done on December 10th of the previous year. Okay. and your customer has 30 days to pay you. So what happens in that case is you say, all right, on December 20th, which is when the actual delivery of the merchandise takes place, I am going to recognize an accounts receivable. So that customer owes me $10,000. He didn't give me the cash yet. It's just something that he owes to me. But I will recognize a sale in December. So does that make a big difference? Well, if your calendar year, your accounting year ends on December 31st, that changes when you're actually recognizing the sale. And instead of being in 2020, maybe it now becomes a 2021 event, okay? And depending on how profitable or unprofitable you are, that can make a difference, okay? But it's not until January 19th when the customer actually pays you the $10,000 that you say, okay, I'm going to recognize that $10,000 in cash, and I'm going to cancel out that accounts receivable. You notice that initially it was a debit, and the credit of $10,000 essentially cancels out that account, and you still have your money. The customer has their merchandise. The sale has been recognized. Okay. All right, next slide, please. Let's skip over this slide because of the time constraint, but let's talk about the three financial statements here. You might have to hit enter again to, yeah, there you go. So there's three statements. One is the income statement, and basically this tells you whether or not you're making a profit or a loss. The other main thing it tells you, and something you need to control as a business owner, are the expenses. What did you spend money on? And are you spending above what you thought you were going to spend, or are you spending below what you thought you were going to spend? In other words, are you on track to meet your budget for the year or for the month, or are you above or below that amount? The second is the cash flow, and this is probably the most important of the three. A lot of people think it's that income statement, but the cash flow really, again, goes back to the fact that if money isn't coming into your checking account and you've got more money going out than you've got coming in, if that is a sustained pattern, eventually you're going to be out of cash totally, and you're also going to be out of business. So the cash flow statement simply tells you how much money is coming into the business and where it's coming from, and how much money is going out of the business and where it's going, okay? The third statement is a balance sheet, and this is kind of a snapshot at the end of the year or the end of the month. It's a one-time view of all your assets and liabilities. So how much cash do you have, and how many delivery vehicles, and how much inventory? Those are all assets. Liabilities are the money that you owe to the bank for your loan. It may be an accounts payable that you owe somebody who's already given you merchandise, but they gave you 30 days to pay for it. So those are your assets versus your liabilities. And then the difference between those two is the book value of the business. So there's a difference between what your business is worth and the book value. The book value is simply the difference between the assets and the liabilities. Whatever that difference is, that's recorded as equity in the business or the worth of the business. However, somebody may be willing to come along and pay you 3 times what your book value is of the business, and that's a business worth. So try to make the distinction between the fact that we're in today's talk, we're going to talk about the book value of the equity that is on your balance sheet. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to talk about some examples, give you an idea of what we're talking about with these 3 statements. So we'll start with the balance sheet. In this particular company, and these are just made up numbers, but it's, you know, to serve as an example. So what are the assets? This company has cash of $20,000. They have accounts receivable, which is money that other people owe them because they've already completed the sales. So they got $40,000 of accounts receivable. They have $12,000 of inventory on the shelves. And there are some other miscellaneous assets that we don't really need to go into detail on, but there's 3,000 of those. So their current assets are $75,000. Now, why do I say current assets? Current assets are assets that you expect to be able to liquidate and turn into cash within the next 12 months. Okay, so that's basically a 1-year time horizon. The other assets or long-term assets, sometimes called fixed assets, are those that you expect to use over a much longer period of time, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. So there are things like equipment. So if you bought a delivery van, you don't expect to use up that delivery van in 1 year, right? You're expecting to be able to use that van for 5, 6, 7 years. Any equipment, manufacturing equipment is usually considered to be a fixed asset or a long-term asset. And there's other miscellaneous things. So between the current assets and the fixed assets, we've got total assets for this business of $155,000. Okay. So remember, we talked about on the left side or the debits. Okay. So in total on the left side, we got $155,000. Now, we owe money to people. So we owe $22,000 in accounts payable. That's one of my liabilities. There may be accrued expenses, which means maybe I owe 3 months worth of insurance premiums to the insurance company, but they only bill me every 6 months. So that is an accrued expense. That's 3 months worth that you typically have kind of used up but haven't paid for yet. The current portion of a loan. So if you borrowed money for 4 years, maybe to finance that delivery vehicle, the amount that you will need to pay back in principal to the lender is considered the current portion of the loan. Anything over and above that goes into the long-term loan, which you see there listed a little farther down the line. So again, just like you had assets, current assets, long-term assets, you've got current liabilities and long-term liabilities. And the long-term liabilities are liabilities that you owe a year or later, whereas the current liabilities are those that you need to expect to pay within the next 12 months. So that brings us down to the worth of the business, the owner's equity. The capital stock is usually money that you've put into the business to start it. And, you know, depending on the legal entity you choose, that may be actual stock certificates or at least a count of stock. It may be an LLC ownership interest. But, you know, you put money into the business event, it's initially, that's usually called your capital stock. As you make money over the years, some of that money is spent to support your family and you take it out of the business, but hopefully some of it stays in the business. And that becomes retained earnings. And over the years, that retained earnings bucket should continue to grow. Now, how much should you take out and how much should you leave in the business? That depends on what your future plans are. If you want to open a new store or produce a brand new product line, those things cost money. So you want to build up that retained earnings and not take quite so much money out for yourself so that you're going to have the funds to do those things that you plan to do in a year or two down the road. Okay. So between the liabilities and the owner's equity, that's your $155,000, which balances to the total assets. Okay. All right, next slide, please. The income statement will be the second we'll talk about. Here you start with your net sales or net revenue, and you subtract the cost of producing those things that you sold. So let's say you're making cupcakes, okay? You may have $500,000 that year of cupcake sales, but the cost of the sugar and the flour and the little crinkle paper cups that the cupcakes are served in, all those things are called variable costs or the costs of goods sold. That's the cost of the cupcakes that you actually spent money on. Okay, and the difference between those two is what's called the gross margin, or sometimes referred to as the gross profit. The gross margin is usually taken to be a percentage of sales that are profit, whereas gross profit is the actual dollar amount. So in this case, we've got $260,000 of gross margin. Now, remember I talked about earlier that some people don't keep track of all their expenses. So where are those other expenses? Typically, they're called operating expenses, or sometimes they're called fixed expenses. But this is money that's going to go out the door in support of your business. So sales and marketing, $65,000. You know, you got to let people know this may be money that you spend on developing and maintaining your website. This may be special sales advertising that you put out because you're having a 2-for-1 sale that month or that week. It's introductory advertising to let people know that you're actually in business. Those expenses exist regardless of whether you produce 1 cupcake or 1,000 cupcakes, right? So those are called operating expenses as opposed to cost of goods sold. Those are not counted against the actual production of the cupcakes. General administrative, so if you have somebody you have on staff part-time as a bookkeeper, your own salary as the owner, that becomes general administrative. And so there's a lot of expensive, your telephone bill, your insurance bill, your utilities for water and electric, all those things go into that kind of general and administrative expenses, because all those expenses will be there again, whether you produce 1 cupcake or 1,000 cupcakes. And then depreciation said, well, I bought that delivery van, but the IRS says I can't just expense the whole cost of delivery van all at once. So I can only depreciate, and we'll show you an example of this later on, I can only allocate so much of what it costs me to buy that van each year until it gets to the end of its useful life. Okay, so I got gross profit less my operating expenses, and I have income from operations of $100,000. Now, remember, we had the loan, so we got to pay interest on the loan. Well, that's also an expense. The principal is not an expense. You're just paying back a liability, right? But the interest is an expense. So in this case, they spent $4,000 on interest for the loan, and that reduces my income to what is called NIBT, or net income before taxes, of $96,000. So in theory, if you're doing this right, you've accounted for everything that you're spending money on, and depreciation all goes into this. And then the IRS is going to want their share. So if in this case it's a C Corp, you pay 21%, so it works out to about $21,000. And your after-tax net income becomes $75,000. Okay. So on the right-hand side here is just kind of, showing that your sales have to account for the people that refund the product. They bring it back, they didn't like it, it doesn't work, it's broken, whatever. So there were actually $520,000 of sales, but the net sales, which is net of all those returns, is $500,000. Okay. Cost of goods sold is usually direct labor and direct materials. So if you're making cupcakes, you're hiring a baker to come in and produce the cupcakes on an hourly basis, that hourly wage is considered part of the cost of goods sold. And then your sales and marketing, again, are just expenses that you are going to incur, but they're not related to production. And then general administrative, these are just kind of some of the major categories that go into that $75,000. Okay. Are there any questions? Do we have the capability for people to be asking questions?
Yes, if anyone has any questions, they can leave it in the chat and we can answer them.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the third of the statements. And again, I would point to you and tell you that this is probably the most important of the three. And cash flow, again, is exactly what it says. It's tracking the flow of cash into and out of your business. So this is usually over a given period. So this might be over a month or over a quarter or over a year. That's for you to decide what kind of a time frame you're looking at. But it is over a period as opposed to the balance sheet, which is just a snapshot in time. And basically it says, all right, I got $10,000 in my checking account on day one of that period. So, whether that's in the checking account or maybe you've got a CD for the business, you combine all that together, that's your beginning cash. Now you've got income that comes into the accounting. Hang on a second, I got a question here. What is depreciation portion? It disappeared on me. Well, I do have a slide on depreciation, so I will get to that eventually. And if I don't, you can re-ask the question. So you have cash receipts, so that income from operations. So if I'm selling cupcakes, I sell in that quarter, if this is a quarterly statement, $100,000 worth of cupcakes. I have to add back in the depreciation. Remember, we had a depreciation expense in the income statement, but it wasn't really cash out. It's just an IRS contrivance that says you can only expense so much of that $50,000 that you spent on that delivery van and on day one that you open, and you can only allocate so much of that expense each year. So this is not really cash. Depreciation is not a cash expense, and therefore you're adding $20,000 back in because it wasn't really money that left the company or the money that came into the company. Okay. So now we've got $120,000 of additional funds flowing in. And then the cash disbursements are the outflow. So I purchased a new piece of equipment for $75,000. Remember, we had $4,000 in interest on the loan. That's cash out. I had to repay $15,000 of principal on the loan for that year. So I'm also including the principal here where I wouldn't on the income statement. And then my income tax, well, the IRS wants their money. I got to send them a check. So that's actual cash out as well. So I got total disbursements of $110,000. So I take my $10,000 starting, I add 120, I subtract 110, and at the end of the period, I should end up with $20,000 in my checking account. Okay. All right. And there's some detailed notes out here, but I want to make sure we get this done on time. So that's cash flow. Now there was a couple of questions here. Let's see. What is depreciation portion on the profit or loss? Depreciation is an expense that you take in that year for whatever the IRS says you're allowed to take. And therefore that is an expense that is deducted from your revenue, and that lowers your profit. Okay. Now it's just funny money really, because there is no cash going out for this depreciation. So lowering your profit simply says that you're going to end up paying less income tax, which is a good thing, right? And then what is the depreciation portion on the profit? Oh, it's the same question. Okay. And let's see if there's one over here. What is, okay, so it's the same question 3 times. That's okay. That's all right. Okay, so when you are doing your accounting and you're trying to figure out whether or not you're making a profit, you have to start with what your sales are. And you can say sales is basically sales is 2 things. It's the number of units you sell times the actual selling price that you sell it at. So if you're determining your selling, if you're doing products, it's pretty easy. You just count the number of products that you sold. If you're a service company, this may be the number of hours that the service is provided, or maybe like a lawn service where you're mowing lawns. You basically charge them $50 or $60 per lawn mowing. So it is not an hourly rate. It's just a billable amount for that unit of production, which is mowing the lawn that day. And then there are combinations. You know, you may do lawn service, but also provide fertilization and provide insect repellent or killers as part of your service, in which case, you know, you're going to have service hours and products because you're selling the insecticide, you're selling the weed killer. Okay. But it's up to you to determine what makes up a unit of sale. Okay. If you're just selling products, you're selling them over the internet, the customer pays with their credit card, boom, the transaction done. That's pretty easy to determine what a unit of sale is. But like I said, if you're doing custom work, you're remodeling kitchens, or you're doing landscaping as opposed to cutting lawns, your unit of sales may be drastically different. But you have to make up your mind as to what determines that unit of sale. Once you do determine it, now you have to figure out what it costs you to produce that unit of sales. So again, we've got the direct cost per unit. And and we determine the price per unit, hopefully at some multiple of my expenses. So if there's one way of costing production, which is called, I'm drawing a mental blank now. I just went over this with another presentation 2 days ago, so I should know it. It'll come to me later, but let's go to the next slide. Okay. So how many items or services will you sell? So you determine what that unit volume is. And now you say, all right, depending on how long of a projection I'm doing for, maybe I want to know how many I'm going to average per day or per week or per month or per quarter. And it's up to you depending on the time frame that you're examining. You also got an issue if I'm doing kitchen remodeling and I want to look at my monthly sales. Well, remodeling a kitchen can take more than a month. So if you are doing cash accounting, and remember, right, you only account for the sale once the cash is received from the customer, that's pretty easy to do. But if you're doing something that's multiple months and maybe they don't pay you until the job is finished and you're doing accrual accounting, well, you may have to account for 10% of it the first month because you only started partway through the month. And it's 30% for each of the next 3 months. So that gets you up to 100%. And that is how you account for your existing sales. Okay. Realize that new customers take longer to find. And when they get started, they typically buy less until they're comfortable with you and your process. So don't expect the same sales to show up every month, particularly when you're starting out. You're going to have to kind of modify your sales and say, I expect substantial growth over perhaps the first 2 years. So if my expectation is that my business can sell $100,000 a month, I'm not going to open a business and expect to see $100,000 in revenue the very first month. I may do $20,000 because people don't even know I exist yet. And then the next month will be 30,000, et cetera, until I get to the $100,000 level. Okay. All right, next slide, please.
Craig, it looks like we have a question that is, why do expenses increase debit and decrease credit? Income sales decrease debit, increase credit, and equity decrease debit and increase credit.
Well, okay. If you have an expense, okay, that is a negative. Okay, so if you go back and think about, oh, can't go back. If you think about it, it's the accounting on whether you're on the left side or the right side. And an expense is basically a counter revenue. All right, so if your debit is the sale and you sell a cupcake for $1, that's debit. Your expense, the 50 cents it costs you for the chocolate and the flour, etc., has to be on the other side of the statement because it's negative. It's subtracting from the sales volume. In terms of equity, if you put $20,000 or whatever into the business initially, that's going to go on the right side of the ledger. And the cash that you put in will become cash in your checking account. That's going to be on the left side of the ledger. So almost every transaction that you're going to have within the general ledger, which feeds through to these other statements, there's going to be a credit and a debit, and there's going to be some offset. So if I sell $50,000, I sell $50,000. If I sold it on credit, well, that becomes a accounts receivable, and that's on the other side of the balance sheet. So I'm hoping that helps.
Thank
And
you.
again, if this is something that's really confusing to you and you don't really have a taste for doing accounting yourself, you need to find somebody who can help you with that as a bookkeeping service or an accounting service that takes care of that stuff for you. The other thing you can do is if you kind of an intermediate step is to get something like QuickBooks, or there's all kinds of other packages out there, Peachtree, which are software packages which can do the accounting for you. And they typically are very, very clear in terms of what type of a transaction you put into credit or into debit, and you know, whether or not it's an equity transaction or a sales transaction, etc. Okay. All right, so going back to here, let's say that in this particular example, we expect to sell 60 units per day. Where our average sales price, and remember, this is a net amount. So if we've got refunds, we have to subtract that out. Or if we're offering discounts, maybe my retail price is $25, but I'm having a sales that month at 20% off, so I can only book $20 of revenue per unit. So you have to be honest with yourself about what you're actually selling things for and not what your listed price is. And then how many days are going to be open? So in a particular month, this month, maybe they aren't open on the weekends, or maybe they're not open on Sundays, and maybe there's a holiday or two in there. So for this particular month, they're going to be open 22 days. So you multiply these three numbers together, and this is your estimate of, well, not your estimate, it is actually is your sales for that particular month, $26,400. Okay, next slide, please. Now we talked a little about variable and fixed expenses. I just want to go into a little bit more detail here so you have a good understanding of how to classify expenses that you might have. So yeah, there you go. So on variable expenses, again, these are typically expenses, or sometimes called direct expenses. But again, if you think of the cupcake example, this is the cost of the sugar, this is the flour, this is the chocolate, this is the little sprinkles that go on top of the cupcakes, the little paper crinkled holder that the cupcakes go in. All those things are variable because if I don't produce any cupcakes, I don't have any of those expenses. If I produce a lot more of them, I'm going to have a lot more of those expenses. So all those expenses vary with my production, okay? So you notice you got the raw materials, you've got the labor. Again, if I'm hiring a baker on an hourly basis, that salary is going to go in there. Production supplies, so that's little cupcake holders. And if you're selling the cupcakes, you know, you put them in a bag and they always put a napkin in there. That's the cost of your napkins, because if you don't sell cupcakes, you don't use napkins. If you have salespeople and they are on commission, the commission portion of what you pay is a variable expense. But if they are, say, 30% commission and it's salary based, the salary based portion becomes a fixed cost because you have to pay them that whether they sell anything or not. Remember delivery costs, some people forget to include those, and product packaging. So all of those things are expenses that occur only if you're actually producing or selling something, depending on the type of business you're in. On the other side, though, if you've got a storefront, you're going to have a rent. If you've bought your building, you're going to have a mortgage. If you've got an office manager or other staff on board, you're going to have to pay them. Those are all indirect costs because they get paid whether you sell 1 cupcake or 1,000 cupcakes. Okay, office supplies, you know, your staples, your copier paper, all that kind of stuff. You know, all those things seem kind of minor in the grand scheme of things, but they add up. So you don't want to neglect them. Again, sales staff salaries, not commissions. Your insurance, your legal expenses, utilities, you know, basically anything that you have that's an expense that is not directly related to your production or your sales, it becomes a fixed or an indirect cost. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is a more detailed example of what we were talking about regarding depreciation. So we have a van we bought, spent $33,000 for it, okay? We expect it to be useful for 5 years and we can sell it to a junkyard for $3,000 at the end of its life. So the first line there is the cash flow. That says I have to spend $33,000 today to buy the van. And there's really nothing else that I have to account for until I get to the end of the life of the product. And then I'm going to have $3,000 come back in because I sold the remainder of the van to the junkyard. The IRS says, no, you can't account for it that way. That may be where your cash went, but we're only going to let you depreciate $6,000 per year, because 6 times 5 years is $30,000. And that's the total amount that you are going to end up spending. So this 33,000 minus the 3,000 cash value at the end is $30,000. And that is accounted for by taking an expense of $6,000 per year for 5 years. Okay. So remember, that depreciation expense is not cash. It's not money going out. Okay, next slide, please. All right, we're getting close to the end here. This is just more examples of variable costs. How does bonus depreciation work? I believe what she's referring to there is the IRS allows you, depending on the tax laws, to take more than the standard amount of depreciation. I think under the last tax law passed in 2018, you were allowed to actually completely depreciate in the first year some expenses that weren't too large. So that is, again, following the IRS guidelines. Most of you won't know those things. You need to have your accountant or a tax accountant handle that for you. So let's skip this slide since we already talked about the variable cost. Gross profit margin, this is important. So you need to know your direct costs. Again, if it's cupcakes, it's the sugar, it's the flour, it's the cost of the baker to bake the cupcakes, etc. And all those expenses are subtracted from your sales in order to get to what is called the gross profit margin. So go to the next slide, please. So here's an example. Somebody's got a local nursery. They do landscaping. They price per unit. So their average landscaping charge is $2,000. Their variable cost to actually install those plants and buy those plants is $1,100. So therefore their gross profit margin per unit, because in this case, landscaping, remember, so you had to determine what your unit is. A landscaping job is a unit here. And so you make $900 in gross profit dollars, and your gross profit margin is 45% of the revenue. Okay. So your expenses are 55%, and therefore what's left over is 45%. And out of that has to come all of your fixed expenses. So your rent, your utilities, et cetera, still have to be deducted to get to your net margin. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so let's, we're almost at the end of our time. Let's skip over this slide and skip this one. Okay, break even is something you need to know about. Basically what this says is how many units of production do I have to sell before I've paid for all my fixed and my variable costs. So everything has been paid for. I'm making zero profit dollars at that point, but every unit above break even, I start to generate cash that becomes profit. Okay. So this kind of a graphical representation, that blue line simply says that if I have fixed costs, those fixed costs are going to be the same regardless of how many cupcakes I sell. So it's a straight vertical line. The other line that is going slanting upwards is your actual revenue. So the more you sell, the more you have in revenue, and therefore that line goes up. All right, so basically where those two lines cross is your break-even point, because your revenue is equal to your fixed costs, and it depends on the unit sales. All right, next slide, please. Okay. All right, so this is an example of how you actually make that calculation. So let's say they're making your a coffee purveyor. You've got a coffee shop, and you've got total fixed costs of $3,550 per month. Now you've got to pay for all those expenses, regardless of how many cups of coffee you sell. Well, let's assume that you can able to sell on average $3 per cup of coffee. And at the cost of actually producing that for the beans and the coffee filters and the cups, etc., is $1. And therefore your gross profit is $2. This is after your variable costs, right? So to say, all right, how many cups of coffee do I need to sell in order to break even? I take the $35.50 of fixed costs, I divide it by that gross profit per cup of coffee of $2, and I have to sell 1,775 cups of coffee per month just to break even. If I sell less than that, I'm actually going to show a loss for that period. If I can sell any more than 1,775, then I make a gross profit. So that's why it's an important number to know. You know, does that, when you do your initial calculations, does that seem like a reasonable amount of coffee to sell? Well, if I'm open 22 days, I divide 1,775 by 22 to get the number of cups of coffee per day. Does that make sense? Okay, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a judgment call that you have to make. Next slide. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of it. Again, the really important things to remember are that cash in and cash out is what you really have to concentrate on. The income on the statement accounts for depreciation, which is a non-cash expense. So therefore, it is less accurate of what's actually going on in your business. And the balance sheet is just kind of a snapshot. You want to do that maybe at the end of the quarter, end of the year, but it's probably the least important of the three statements. Okay. Any other questions?
It looks like you have a question in the chat that says, how does bonus depreciation work and how is it being reported?
Okay, I think I answered that, but if, again, the bonus depreciation, which says that if the standard depreciation is $6,000, that maybe you can take $12,000 this year because the IRS or the tax law changed to allow that to happen. And let's say that that's, and again, if I'm not talking about the same thing as my the questioner, please let me know. But if that were the case, then basically what you would have is $12,000 of depreciation expense. The reason they do that is because they're trying to save you money on taxes. So let's say you had $50,000 of after expenses revenue, and you can now deduct $12,000, you only pay taxes on $38,000. Whereas if you could only deduct $6,000, you're paying taxes on $44,000. Okay, so the bonus depreciation, or it's also called accelerated depreciation, basically reduces your profit initially because it increases your expenses. The problem is that when you get to the end of the useful life, there's no more depreciation left because you already took all of it in the front end. But most people are more worried that a dollar is worth $1 today. $1 might be worth 90 cents 5 years from now. And inflation continues to bubble up as it has been lately. That could be 80 cents. So for most people, they say, well, I'll take that $1 of depreciation now because it directly saves me $1 of income tax. Okay, anything else?
It looks like fixed cost here is $20, $60 and break even, or is it measured in something else on the graph is the rest of the question.
Can you repeat that question?
Yes, she wrote, fixed cost here is $20, $60 and break even, or is it measured in something else regarding to the graph?
Can you go back to that slide, please?
Sure.
Okay, so $20. I'm not quite sure what she's referring to unless she's referring to a different slide. But the fixed cost, that blue line, is vertical because it says if it's truly a fixed cost, those costs are going to be there regardless of how much you produce. So if you look at that X scale, the unit sales, 0, 50, 100, 150, whatever it is, you're going to have the same total fixed dollar amount. And in this case, it's somewhere around $90,000 if that wasn't fixed costs in thousands of dollars. Break-even point that purple line simply says that the more I sell, the more revenue I'm going to have, and that goes up. So that is fixed cost and revenue, I guess, depending on which line you're looking at. If you're looking at the blue line, that actually is the fixed cost. If you're looking at the purple line, that's the revenue. Fixed cost on the left, 0.20. Oh, the scale. Oh, okay. All right. Well, yeah, that's just the scale that says, where are my fixed costs? You determine that by going through all your expenses, your fixed expenses, and adding them all up. And that total is what you would express on that y-axis or the vertical axis. So 20, 40, 60, those numbers are, you're only going to worry about one of those numbers, and that's the fixed cost for your particular situation. So if your fixed costs were $50,000, your blue line would actually show up opposite 50. It would be lower than it is on this particular graph.
Thank you so much, Craig. I think that answered the question. I'm going to go back. And are there any other questions for Craig or any of the other speakers?
Well, thank you, everyone. If you do want to talk with a SCORE mentor, our services are free. And you can go to the jacksonville.score.org website and find a mentor that you can meet with. We do them by telephone or Zoom, whatever. We don't do a lot of them in person right now. But thank you for attending, and I appreciate your participation.
Thank you so much, Craig. Thaddeus, do you have anything else to add before we wrap up?
No, just want to say thank you again to Marshall, Steve, and Craig for the wonderful presentations. Gave us a lot of food for thought, and I am sure the attendees were both informed and found immense benefit in the remarks. So thank you so much. Thank you to you, Georgia, and Jackie. So I'll take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you to our speakers, Marshall, Steve, Thaddeus, Craig. Everyone, the video was recorded, so if you'd like to revisit it, it will be on our online classroom that we will give you a link to. And if you could just please take a moment to fill out the feedback forms, that would be great. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day and weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good weekend.